Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Tomorrow's 4th of July. I want to talk about that a little bit. We'll do it later in the podcast. But today's title is Knowledge is Strength and Opinion is Fleeting. You just look at what's going on, and especially now in the news with all the contradictory opinions. I mean, what's knowledge and what's opinion and what's spin and what's truth? And it's just the whole thing is, it's such a mess. By the way, if you have comments, if you post them, through the internet or whatever, through Facebook or whatever, however you're viewing this, I tend not to see them until after the podcast is over, and then they're just kind of gone. But if you go to michaelmamas.net and you'll be able to see where you can post a comment to the current blog. And if you post a comment there, then I'll be able to respond in writing in the same place. And we used to do that like crazy, but ever since I switched from podcasts from written blogs to doing the podcast, that stopped happening. I think people just don't want to take, I don't know, what is it, Scotty? They don't want to take the extra step of going from listening back to I don't know what it is.
Right.
But anyway, please do that. That used to be a really lively and fun part of doing these broadcasts, It merits repeating that we're in a phase transition. Every week I hear from so many people, wherever they are in the country, whatever they're doing, and things are so crazy, their personal lives are so crazy, everything's so crazy, and what's going on. And then so many are watching the news, and it's so depressing, what's going to happen to the world? Are we going into economic collapse? All this stuff. And there's reason to be concerned, but I think it has to be done in the context of this is the phase transition, and that's the nature of phase transitions. We're transitioning into a golden age, and it's knowledge. Knowledge is the strength that will carry us through. And so we can't just bury our heads in the sand and be oblivious, because though the transition is happening, it can happen smoothly or it can happen quite painfully. And the more knowledge we have, the more consciously we approach the thing, and the more responsibly we approach the whole dynamic, that will determine, how smooth the transition is. Well, I wanted to mention July 12th. You know what July 12th is, Scotty? No, you can't possibly, do you? You probably saw it in my notes. Yeah, the James Webb telescope, they're going to post the photographs on July 12th. And so that way they'll look at what they're saying is the most distant stars at the edge of the universe, right when the Big Bang started, And so they're expecting to see only very young galaxies. But there are a lot of physicists that are refuting, in their opinion, the Big Bang. And they're saying that what they're going to see is fully mature galaxies that just show that this propunction, this universe of ours, is way older than the Big Bang predicts, which would, wreak havoc on the Big Bang. But I have an opinion on that. If you talk to physicists, they say, well, and if you talk about, for example, the Vedic knowledge of the structure of the universe and things like that, they say, well, we only deal with what's observable. We only deal with what we've seen. And we base our theories of the universe on that, as opposed to what they would just call metaphysics, But the thing is, that limits their perspective to what they've seen. So with Galileo, he could only see so far with that crummy little telescope, and his theories were based on that. And now we get more powerful telescopes and we see more. But how do we know that what we think is the outer limit of the universe is really just a small segment, you know. So I think whatever they come up with, in my opinion, with the James Webb Telescope, it's going to be limited to what they're able to perceive with it. And I feel like the universe is, much bigger.
Do you know which way they're pointing it?
That's a good question.
Because it's either going from the Big Bang or towards the Big Bang.
I don't
You
know,
know what I
Scotty.
mean?
Yeah. Well, there
Yeah.
are what are those little areas in the universe that they thought were just nothing there?
Yeah.
That when they got the Hubble, they realized it was packed with galaxies. I'm sure
Yeah.
they're finding little places like that where there's nothing, but
Well, I've
with
heard
enough
it. Aren't
magnification,
we
they
in
can
one
see
of those dark spots here?
it. I
Our
don't know.
our the Milky Way is supposedly in one of the dark spots.
I don't know what that even means, Scotty.
Yeah, it's one of those patches where you could, like it's not as bright as some of the other parts.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about creating an initiative as part of the school, the organization CRS, Center of Rational Spirituality. And the initiative would be Ancient Technology Research Initiative, Atri, A-T-R-I. And of course, Autry is the rishi that is kind of like, it's rishi meaning the organizing power, that aspect of creation, that value that takes the unbounded nature of Chaitanya, the absolute, and just channels through this principle called Atri, the certain laws, certain structures that are is the fundamental root of our solar system, our propunchum, our universe. Okay, and so I just thought that I like it. Atri is so fundamental, so pivotal in our understanding of our small little universe, small in the context that according to the Vedic literature, there are tons of what we call universe, tons of universes. And there's a different rishi value for each one, fundamental rishi value. And that's what kind of structures the nature of that particular propunchum, that particular universe. And Atri is the one for us. That's why they say, the aspect of divinity that is the creator is Brahma, and Atri, they say, is the son of Brahma, so it works like that. I think it's all very beautiful, really. So I just wanted to mention that. And the thing is that the ancient seers cognized all this. See, the beauty of the thing is what we are fundamentally in the depth of our being is that one thing that's the source of everything. I am that, thou art that, all of this is nothing but that. And what distinguishes us from, a rock is that we have a nervous system that's evolved, that's gravitated back to the very nature of the knowledge that the foundation of existence is pregnant with. And our nervous system has evolved to the point where we can be cognizant of all that. So it's a matter of sophistication of the nervous system. Human beings have a very much more sophisticated nervous system than the nervous system of a rock, even though both are one with God. You see, like that. But what's going on in the world today with this phase transition going on? I saw this compelling quote. I didn't know if I should laugh or cry or what, but it was so poignant, and the phrase was the normalization of perversion. The idea being that so much of what in the past, and not just sexual perversion, but perversion in all sorts of senses, what was in the past would have just been viewed as just perverted is now becoming almost mainstream, and it's supposed to be accepted and embraced. And so I thought that the expression it impacted me, And so now opinions are flying all over the place. Perspectives are so diametrically opposed to one another, and it's almost like regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, in that sense, one thing that's for sure is there's a huge group of people out there that are just radically wrong. And I think it's, all we can do is it's up to us to try to determine what side of the aisle we want to be on all these different issues. And it covers the gamut: education, guns, drugs, infiltrating the border, politics. It just goes on and on. It almost seems in every arena there's a perspective out there that just seems so perverse,
Well, what's making it so, that the masses are so susceptible to emotion, thoughts, all these superficial things versus, and how do you get people to like, okay,
it's
come,
like a it's
yeah,
like a perfect storm, Scotty.
yeah,
We have the internet, and so all of a sudden, people who in the past had no idea of some of the crazy stuff out there. Now we're all just being bombarded with it. All
yeah,
these different perspectives on the internet, and 100 different channels on your television, and promoting this perspective, that perspective, and it's just more than people, I think, could even handle. And then what goes on even further than that is that people have realized how much they can manipulate people and populations by using that very strategically. I mean, I've always used the example of the Russian Revolution and how they convinced the people that the Tsar was a bad guy, and really what it was the bankers that were funding the whole thing because they wanted to take over the economic system of Russia. And so they just convinced all of these people of these terrible things. And that's epidemic now. And I think the internet and 100 television channels and 200, whatever it is, all those things are contributing to it. And it's something that has been approached strategically for decades. And it's really just recently come to a head, really. And that's the phase transition. Because what's going to happen is people are, at first it's like, oh my God, chaos, crazy, all this nutty stuff, the normalization of perversion, all that kind of thing. But what's going to happen now is people are going to look at it and they're going to sober up, and they're going to be like, well, wait a minute, we need to take a step back, and we need to realize how powerful the media is and how powerful so many forces are, the overtaking of the educational system, starting, I remember back in the 70s, I think it started before then, but really reached a crescendo in the 70s with the Kent State riots and that whole thing. And then the educational institutions became just extremely politically motivated, so that now arguably the educational institutions aren't educational institutions anymore so much as they're indoctrination organizations, so all that is going on.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We're outside of Seattle, and I was in line, and there was somebody behind us that was just reading an email saying they were having to cancel their plans for their 4th of July celebration because whoever it was that was having the celebration was so depressed at just how terrible things were for them. And I'm like, I'm looking around at this place, and I'm like, there's nothing that's like self-imposed based on some narrative that's coming at you, because there's nothing like that happening anywhere in this town where it is. It's not here. It's like, it's just they're being, like you said, bombarded by all ththese things,
Yeah, and
making them feel that way.
we have a mutual friend, Scotty, but I guess I
Yeah.
won't use his name because I wouldn't know if he wanted me to, but he used to work in Silicon Valley. and it's, known for being quite liberal, San Francisco area.
Yeah.
And then he got transferred. He moved up to Seattle, and he said that Seattle area makes Silicon Valley look conservative. And so I can only imagine, and it's just from things I've heard from people, the stuff that's flying around.
I mean, I felt like turning around and going, guys, you live in just like this beautiful place.
Yeah.
There's all these things. It's nice. I mean, just there's everything to be happy is here, and you're not happy. Come on, this place. If you want to, it's like you've never traveled anywhere to another country or something where things are terrible. You know what I mean? We have.
Well, yeah, and a lot of that, Scotty, has to do, again, I mean, these two things are related. It's the intentional infiltration of the United States, by different forces. I've talked about China, and I've talked about the whole woke thing, and then the alliance of big business with liberal perspectives. And then there's also this whole thing with BlackRock. And BlackRock is this asset management company. They manage $10 trillion. That's half the GDP of the United States. They manage that many assets. And so they have unbelievable power. And I think one of the things that makes it hard for people to accept this stuff is that it's unimaginable how twisted, how corrupt a lot of motivations are. I mean, who would think that, like, really, come on, that, what they call conspiracy theory, China's infiltrating the United States. Well, China, for example, doesn't have, this is just one point, China doesn't have enough land to grow the crops to feed their own people. They can't even feed half of their own population. So that's why they're going in the United States and they're buying up farmland. That's why, do you know that in Africa, pretty much every country, there might be Zimbabwe, might be resisting, I'm not sure. But other than that, every country in Africa is basically a colony of China. And China's going in there and just taking all the natural resources and bringing them back to China. South America, same thing's going on in South America, with the one exception of Brazil. And of course, the president of Brazil is catching a lot of flack, and there's a lot of pressure. And people are openly like this new socialist world order. And what is a socialist world order? They call it socialist. It's largely communist. And it's highly influenced, if not controlled, by the Red Chinese. And they're motivated to just dominate the global economy and the world. And so they start infiltrating. The best way to destroy a nation is from within, to convince the people that the country is lousy, it needs to be overthrown. And that is what they're doing. They did a poll recently, 38% of Americans think are proud to be Americans. Whereas not many years ago at all, a few years, I don't know what it was like 68% were proud to be American. Where's that coming from? Now, I agree, we did some things. A lot of the wars we got into were horrible and unjustifiable, and a lot of things like that. But also, and I think even, I won't even say more so, but I'll just say to a great degree, the reason I can't say more so is because, when masses of people are being killed needlessly, what do you say about that? But more powerfully, with respect to the overtake of the nation, is the infiltration of the United States with fentanyl drugs. This whole idea of gun control. Interesting. I mentioned Brazil. Here's a very interesting thing about Brazil. Brazil has had a political hot potato going back and forth. And they would have a liberal president that would ban guns, try to take the guns away from the population, that is. And what would happen is the murder rate would go way up. And then a conservative person would take over, and they would make guns accessible to the people, law-abiding citizens, you know what happened to the murder rate, Scotty? It went down. And that's happened several times. And now with this president that they have, murder rate is down because making guns accessible to the population. And there's similar statistics for states in this country, the United States. And those are just facts, you know, that's just knowledge. The other is opinion. You know, oh, in my opinion, if we should just outlaw guns. And then there's the idea, well, if you outlaw guns, only outlaws have guns. And the political leaders, if they're so adamant about that, why do they have armed guards surrounding them? But nobody else is allowed to have a gun. I mean, things just aren't lining up. Why in the world would you allow fentanyl to infiltrate the nation and not even check at the border? Just have an open border. Why would we be using an educational system that's indoctrinating children into perspectives that their own parents think are perverse? What's the motivation behind the politicians?
It's the push buttons, you know.
A lot of what?
It's pushing buttons and getting them securing their power and this and that.
Yeah. A lot of these politicians are in the pockets there of subversive movements, or you know, they don't want to lose their place, lose their office, because if they do, they're afraid to get thrown in prison. And so the whole thing becomes so twisted and so corrupt, and the motivations are so contrary to the party line. And the reason they're adhering to that party line is because it has power. And then it's so much for the money, like with BlackRock. BlackRock has so much money, and they're controlling board of directors in a lot of the major companies, and they'll go to somebody like Disney and say, you support this perspective, and if you don't support this perspective, you're going to lose your job. And so they end up controlling from behind the scenes corporate America. And that is going on. That is going on. United States and Ukraine, back to land, they have plenty of farmland, tons of it. Other countries don't. And so they want to go in and take over Ukraine, or they want to go in and buy up all the farmland in the United States. And it's not in the interest of the United States, but it's happening, and it's planned, and it's very much intentional. And if gun-free zones are such a good idea, why do the politicians have guns surrounding them to protect them? I think if we could snap our fingers and, okay, no criminals are going to have guns. Who wouldn't do that? We'd all do that. But it's not going to happen, you know? And if there's a guy with a gun protecting the politicians, shouldn't there be a guy with a gun protecting our children? I mean, it's gun-free zone is like, hey, bad guys, come this way and you won't receive any opposition. I mean, it's just nuts, you know. And so we need knowledge, not just opinion. And it's out there. There's factual evidence to so much that people aren't really interested in the facts. They're more interested in the mainstream opinion. And this whole thing with this January 6th, can you believe that some of the people that went into the Congress that day, back January 6th, are still in prison, solitary confinement, and haven't been charged with any crime? What kind of a country is that? Can you believe that now they're having a January 6th hearing, and it's all radical Democrats that already formed an opinion, and they're only allowing people to testify that support that opinion? And then there's this Hutchinson, this woman, you know who I'm talking about, Scotty?
Yeah.
Yeah, she got up there and said all this stuff that is documentably false. But they only let her get up and testify. And the Secret Service agents that she was quoting said, we weren't even there. We had nothing to do with that. It's all
Or
made
it,
up.
or it
But
didn't happen. I was there and it didn't happen.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. That too, you know. And so it's like it's a kangaroo court. It's like Nazi Germany or something. And I have a friend who's an attorney, and he agrees that the law and justice, they have nothing to do with each other. And one thing he said was, how did he put it? He said, a trial is decided before the hearing ever starts. It's determined by the jury selection. And in places like Washington, D.C., where 90-some% of the people are radical Democrats, uh, you're going to get a slanted jury, period. And so where's the justice in that, you know? And then there's the United States Constitution, July 4th, tomorrow, 1776, July 4th, Declaration of Independence. And the thing, our Constitution, see, there's this one idea that says that it needs to be the originalist. You adhere to the Constitution exactly as written. And then there's the other argument that says, well, times change. We didn't have AR-15s when they wrote the Constitution. So how can we apply that now, 250 years later almost? And they use that argument that it's a living and breathing and changing thing. But here's the beauty, I think, of the Constitution, and that is its structure. It is structured in a way that accommodates change. But we need to embrace that structure. Why? Because that structure protects inalienable rights, freedom of speech, freedom, uh, uh, and to throw the baby out then with the bathwater is a mistake. We want to adhere to that structure because it protects us. But we need to also amend the Constitution when it feels right. And that's why they didn't make it completely simple to amend the Constitution, because then you've got nothing. But if there's something really serious and we want to change it, it can be amended. But we don't just ignore it, you know? That's why I like the Constitution, but I also like the fact that things can change to conform to the time within the confines of the Constitution. Making sense, Scotty?
yeah, yeah.
You know, it's interesting too now that people like Jeff Bezos, you know, and Bill Maher, and Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, all these guys now are becoming strong critics of the Biden administration, which is really interesting because they were liberals before. I think they were all liberals before. Uh, and then, do you know, a Chinese state media guy, high up, recently made the statement that capitalism is all about exploitation. Capitalism abused can allow for exploitation. But within the confines of the Constitution, within those constraints, if somebody does go overboard in a direction and start exploiting the population, that's why we have laws that come in and put a restraint on that, protect us from that. But if exploitation, what do they say? That absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you have a dictatorship, or like a government that just runs the country with an iron fist, that's the gateway to exploitation. And so a small group of oligarchs at the top control everything and reduce everybody else down to peasantry in service of the upper crust, those few at the top. And so we just have to think. We have to think. And too much is based on opinion without real knowledge of the subject. So I encourage people to think for yourself, but to be informed, to have knowledge, that just don't go along with the crowd and cheer whatever political perspective happens to be popular in the moment. And that's what makes this country great, is that freedom of speech, freedom of thought. And we can't give it up. Like Benjamin Franklin said when somebody thanked him, for creating the country and all that, he said, well, now you've got it. Let's see if you can keep it. Let's see if we can keep it. I think we will. I think this is a period of time where people are taking a step back and saying, oh my God, things are nutty, but they can be fixed. Anything else, Scotty?
Yeah, I think also, we need to start focusing on all the amazing things that there are out there, because it's like, I'd say 90% of everything is great. There's maybe 10% that's, to work on. There's not like there's no problems, but we have so much to be grateful for where we are and what we have. And
it's a great point, Scotty. Another thing I heard I was going to mention, criticism yields power. And so if you have just a small handful of critics at the top, that's what gets the attention. That's what gets the coverage in the news. And so that's what people see, and that's what dominates their attention. And there's value in that we see what's going on with, manipulation behind the scenes and all that. But foundational, the basis of the whole thing is so great. And so we need to keep that in proper context and be devoted to maintaining what greatness is there, as opposed to tearing it down. Yeah. All right. I guess that's it for this week. Anything else, Scotty?
No.
Okay. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.